but with an unusually large and complex brain.
A very good morning, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Planetary Health Summit 2024 and the 6th annual meeting, and a very warm welcome to Sunway University, located in the very beautiful and dynamic Sunway City, Malaysia. If you are joining us online, we welcome you and hope you will find the sessions this morning engaging and rewarding as well.
Good morning, everyone. If you are joining us for the first time, I am Jessica Kronstadt from the Planetary Health Alliance.
And I'm Paul Andrews from Sunway University, and we will be your MCs for the duration of this summit. Ladies and gentlemen, we begin this morning's session with Professor Joyita Gupta. Professor Gupta is a professor of environment and development in the Global South at the University of Amsterdam and IHE Delft Institute for Water Education. She is also the faculty professor on sustainability, and she has been appointed by the UN Secretary General as co-chair of the 10 high-level representatives of civil society, private sector, and the scientific community to promote science, technology, and innovation for the SDGs for 2025 and 2025. She is ending her term as co-chair of the Earth Commission this year and is a commissioner in the Global Commission on Economics of Water. She was co-chair of UNEP's Global Environment Outlook 6, Healthy Planet, Healthy People. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our first speaker this morning, Professor Joyita Gupta.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for waking up early and coming here. During this conference, I've been hearing a lot of people talking about tipping points and planetary boundaries. But remember that tipping points and planetary boundaries affects the health of all. But long before tipping points set in, you have damage to people. In the Global Environment Outlook, Healthy Planet, Healthy People of 2019, we actually looked at what is the ranking of damage on human health and what is the ranking of issues with respect to planetary impact. And human health is shown in blue, planetary impact is shown in green to red. And what you can see here is that in all the domains that we have, there is impact both on the environment, but also even something like land degradation has massive impacts on human beings. 3.2 billion people are affected today by land degradation, a topic that we do not always talk about. This gives you an idea of the fact that, in fact, damage to humans sets in long before the tipping points narrative. So what I'm going to talk about today is that there is limited environmental utilization space, and therefore the calls for justice are increasing. The Earth Commission has made a proposal called Earth System Justice, and then this proposal talks about how to operationalize justice in terms of ends, and then we talk about safe and just Earth system boundaries and about meeting minimum needs, and then we look at the means, living within the safe and just boundaries, and I'm currently working on a separate project towards global constitutionalism. So, we have limited eco-space on Earth, which means we have limited land, water, we should use much less of the fossil fuels that are available. So more than 70 to 80% of the fossil fuels should be left underground. And so basically what we are talking about is a world of restricted resources. Now, when you have restricted resources in a rational actor model, the neoliberal capitalist will say, let's price it, let's privatize it, and let's trade these commodities based on these principles, most often through confidential contracts and confidential arbitration. If you're talking about hegemonic power, so states, what you find is that many of these states will try to avoid multilateralism. They will say, I want to keep my water for myself, or I want to allow people in my country to continue driving cars or flying in aircrafts. And so what you see is they're trying to focus on the idea of sovereignty. And you see this very often also in the area of water, transboundary water issues. A third option is polycentric approaches, and this is basically about self-management and experimentation. But my argument is that all these three talk about dividing resources, but do not really help to look at the issue of sharing scarce resources between people. And you could perhaps argue that the SDGs are a first step towards talking about how do we share these resources, and ultimately I think we need to move towards global constitutionalism in order to get transformative justice at the global level. Now, if you look at, for example, climate change, we need to move towards zero emissions. So as you move towards zero emissions, the amount of fossil fuels you can use or the amount of meat you can eat decreases. And this means that the ability to share this limited space amongst people is going to become zero at a certain point of time. And as that happens, the calls for justice increase. And if you look at developing countries and industrialized countries, developing countries can no longer aim to become like a rich country, because in many ways, both countries need to reduce their behavioral patterns. And I think that the time that we have for changing our behavioral patterns is so short that in fact the path that rich countries and poor countries will take or need to take will be very different. And what you find is that the later we move towards reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, the more abruptly we have to reduce it. And this in itself is going to cause massive injustices in the world if you're trying to achieve it. So how do we try to do that in a just manner is a critical issue. Now, many rich countries have delayed taking action in reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. But I think that was a very big mistake, because more than 70% of the remaining fossil fuels are in the developing world. So how do we convince the developing world not to use their fossil fuels when the rich countries have used that in the past? And I think this requires the rich countries to actually show that they're willing to take just approaches, that they're willing to take some sacrifices. Otherwise, it's going to be extremely difficult to convince poorer countries to not use fossil fuels. And also, poor people in rich countries will not stop using fossil fuels unless they are subsidized. Today it's the other way around. Today, rich companies get subsidized in rich countries for using fossil fuels, and poor countries have to pay the market rate if they want to move from fossil fuels to other sources of energy. Now, when you look at justice focusing on contextual, diverse local issues, or they focus on universal, standardized global issues. Some of them are very much on the reformist side, conservative justice, and I think we need to be more on the right side, where we're talking about systemic justice, we're talking about transformative justice. And so in the Earth Commission, we looked at the different justice narratives, and we said that the only justice narrative that works to transform all of us towards living within safe and just boundaries is when we have an iteration from local to global, but are on the right side of this diagram. Now, in our justice story, we basically say that conservative justice is not enough. We need to focus on ideal justice, because conservative justice is implementing existing laws, but the existing laws are inadequate. We also focus on recognition justice and epistemic justice, because when you look at justice from the perspective of a rich person, you do not necessarily prioritize the poorest. So this is about prioritizing the poorest, putting the last first. Then we have 3 I's of justice: interspecies justice, intergenerational justice, and intra-generational justice. And these 3 elements come together in terms of revisiting justice of process. Process is about access to information, decision-making, civic space, the right to protest, for example, and going to courts. And then you have substantive justice, which focuses on access to minimum resources and the allocation of the remaining resources, risks, harm, and responsibilities. Now, this is our framework, and when we operationalized this within the Earth Commission, what we did was we looked at 2 elements. First, we looked at just no significant harm. So we looked at the tipping points narrative, the planetary boundaries narrative, and then we said, that's not good enough. We need to go for just boundaries which do not cause harm to people. And we also looked at what does it mean if you want to meet minimum access. In terms of the means we are focusing on addressing the drivers of ecological degradation and the drivers of vulnerability. Poor people are not poor because they were born poor, they were created into poverty. And we look at also liability for harm caused. We look at minimum and maximum use rights of people and how to revisit allocation mechanisms. So this is our justice framework in a nutshell. And then we applied it. So if you look at the planetary boundaries framework, what we did was we said, are the ends just? And therefore we revised the safe boundaries into just boundaries. Then we looked at the minimum, and there we asked, can we meet minimum needs within the boundaries, within the just boundaries? And then we looked at the means. Is the allocation of the remaining resources just? Is the allocation of risk and harm just? Is the allocation of responsibility just? So, in the Earth Commission, this was a project that we, Johan Rockström and I were co-chairs of, along with Qin Daihe from China. And in our work, what we came up with was a number of safe boundaries. So, for example, on climate change, we said 1.5 is safe because beyond 1.5, you can trigger a number of tipping points, and then it's really difficult to predict what the weather will be and what the climate will be. And we have a number of other safe boundaries. But to stop at aerosol pollution, because we discussed this over here, air pollution is a really big problem at the local level. People are affected by that in cities, but also in households where they are cooking on traditional stoves. So you find almost 7 million people are affected every year from air pollution, but at the global level, air pollution is not really a challenge, except in relation to how it affects monsoons. So we actually put a new number at the aerosol pollution level as well. So let me just give you an example of why we think that 1.5 is not just. And this was our presentation at Davos last year. Now, 1.5 is not just because already at 1 degree centigrade, more than 70 million people are exposed to very high wet bulb temperatures. And as a consequence, they can also die from it. And that's just one aspect of the impact of climate change. And if you go back to 1988, 89, there was already research saying that up to 1 degree it's green, between 1 and 2 it's orange, and beyond orange it's red. And yet, the global community has focused on higher levels. They avoided discussing what was just, because also 25 years ago, or 35 years ago, I mean, I started a long time ago with research, justice was seen as a normative topic, not really a scientific topic, and you were always relegated to the side if you were working on justice issues. So let's come back to what is a just boundary. What we found is that for climate change, 1 degree is just, 1.5 is safe. For aerosol, we tightened the boundary because air pollution at local level requires a tighter boundary at the global level than monsoon changes. And also for nitrogen, we tightened the just boundary. For our biodiversity issues, we were already taking nature's contributions to people into account. So justice is somehow woven in with some of our biodiversity targets. Today, we are outside most of these safe and just boundaries. So the yellow ball shows you where we are, and most of these boundaries have been breached, including the safe and just climate boundary. The aerosol boundary has not been breached at the global level, but at the local level, it has been breached. So what you see here is that at least 2 boundaries have been breached in areas that are very, very which are orange in color, and as you go up and become dark red, 7 boundaries have been breached in these different parts of the world. And this requires us to think a lot about how many people are already affected by these issues. Moving to another issue. Suppose we want to meet the minimum needs of people worldwide, and I'm talking in terms of food, water, energy, and a basic amount of infrastructure, a house the size of a parking lot, 3 bulbs, and a refrigerator. Then what you see is that the blue colors show you the current pressure. This is for 2018. And we start at 90%, so don't get fooled. There's already a lot outside the slide. we started 90%. So if up to 100% is the pressure in 2018, if we were to meet the minimum needs of people in terms of a dignified life, that would show you additional pressure on the earth. That's shown in orange. And in pink, if you were helping people to escape from poverty. We're really talking about a very minimum amount. But since we've already crossed the boundaries, all meeting these minimum needs would mean that you would go further out of the boundaries. And that means that we have to rethink exactly how we are going to meet these minimum needs. So we would be outside the boundary on the left side. This is the same diagram shown slightly differently. So you have a pillar, and the pillar represents the domain. And we are already in overshoot in the orange area. And if you were to meet the minimum needs of people, then you would be in the red area. So what we try to do is to say, okay, let's give everybody a minimum and then see what's the boundary and how much corridor is left. In the work that will come out in the Lancet Planetary Health in a few months, there we have actually calculated the impact of meeting minimum needs in terms of the very same units as the planetary boundaries. So we can actually show you how much space there is. Now, in fact, what we show in many cases is, or at least in the case of climate change, is if you meet the minimum needs of people worldwide using the current mix, you're going to cross the planetary boundaries. So what we did in climate change was we said to, what happens if we give everybody 3 bulbs and a refrigerator, everyone in the world? So then we get the base, we know what the safe and just boundary is, and then we see how much space there is and how we need to change that. But the key message from that is that meeting minimum needs has to be done through renewables. And poorer countries can't afford that, so richer countries have to come up and try to see how they can afford it. Now, in terms of the means, how do we address the underlying drivers? So we focus basically on 5 major drivers: overconsumption, unsustainable technology, problematic values, exploitative economic systems, and unjust governance. And I'm going to give you just one example of the possible changes that we are suggesting. For example, we're suggesting that tax justice is critical for trying to address issues of overconsumption. We're saying that perhaps use the precautionary principle for unsustainable technology, because a lot of technology is really useful, but technology also requires a lot of energy and water and other resources, for example, artificial intelligence. And the question is, where does it end up? Does artificial intelligence use more water and more energy than the water and energy it's supposed to save? And we're also looking at how do we change unjust governance. Moving on to what I am going to be working on in the next few years, I'm going to try to work towards global constitutionalism. I've received resources from the Dutch government for that, and I will be looking at how these ends and means and how we can actually try to create a legal system globally to try to solve the problems of the world. It's a visionary idea. It's not necessarily new. It's also going to be challenged by the way people think about it. But I would like to invite anybody in this room who would like to suggest what should be in this room to be a co-author of this new constitution. So it's an open science justice lab approach. And in this, anyone who's going to spend 1,000 words to write, even if it's about AI and justice and how we should govern AI. We heard yesterday that the scholars from AI are saying there needs to be legislation on this issue, but you might want to talk about medical access to medicines. If you have any ideas that should be part of a global constitution, please send them to me, and you're welcome to be a co-author of this process. So, let me end with trying to say something in simple words. If there is a car accident and somebody gets hurt, we all know in this room that that is significant harm. So how many cars should be allowed to drive before the climate change problem is seen as significant? And let me go back to 1992. In the Climate Convention, the Article 2 on harm was framed very carefully to say we should not cause anthropogenic interference on the climate system. It didn't say we should not cause anthropogenic interference and cause harm to people. And so already in the climate convention, they were thinking about, we will cause harm to millions, but let's just make sure that the system does not change so much. And that is a really big challenge for us today, to understand that the planetary boundaries, they protect all of humanity, but they do not protect humans, communities, and countries. You need just Earth system boundaries to try to do that. And the just Earth system boundaries are not just global, they're also local. So we take air pollution into account per cubic meter. We take, for biodiversity, we look at per square kilometer, and we're really looking at the impacts on humans, countries, and communities. So with that, I would like to end my presentation, and I hope it was clear. Thank you.